Now, we left off last week. Okay, we left off last week. We were in the middle of talking about this amazing party that was going to happen in Shushan, the 7-day party that was going to finally get the Jews. Again, a lot of the Jews had left town for the 180 days that the big party was going on because they did not want to partake. But when they finally came back, Achashverosh was like, aha, here we go. I'm making another party for 7 days. L'chol ha'am hanimtza'im b'Shushan habira, for all those who are finally back in Shushan, where I thought I was going to get them the first time. So we talked about the party last week, what it looked like. Today we're going to pick up with the pasuk, the following pasuk. Vashtiya kadas ein ones, and the drinking was by law without force. Kikeni sad melech, for so the king had ordered al kol rav beiso, for all the stewards of his house, la'asos kirtzon ish v'ish, to do as the will of each and every person. Now, often there is a pressure amongst people, especially amongst men, unfortunately, to drink more. It's like, hey man, I'm already up to my third shot. You only had your first. Like, what are you counting? Like, what's even going on? But for some reason, there's this thing where we keep tabs on what people are drinking and who's up to where, and there's like a stress to drink more. As a matter of fact, the Persians had a custom where they would bring somebody a large, like a goblet, like a 40-ounce goblet, a massive goblet, and they would be like, it's so funny. Ein chadash tachas hashemesh. There's nothing new in the world. So just like today on college campuses, people are chanting chug, 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 chug. Back in the day, the Persians had a custom like this where they would bring this huge, roughly 40-ounce, based on the Persian measurements, thing of wine at the beginning of a party. They would encourage people, like, drink, 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 drink. So the king said, Achashverosh said, for this party, there's going to be absolutely no forcing of the drink. Now, there's a few different reasons here. Number one is it's a 7-day party. You start over drinking on the first day, the party sours really, really quickly. So he said, let's not force any drinking. Let people, they'll have their way. When there's wine flowing, people will have their way. I don't want to force it early on. It's going to cause people to lose the whole party. They're going to get sick. They're not going to want. They're going to want to leave. Now, more importantly, though, as the pasuk says, it was lasos kirtzon ish ve'ish, to do according to the will of ish and ish, the man and the man. There are two men in the Meggila who are described as ish. There's Ish Yehudi Hayab Shushan Abira. There was a Jewish man in Shushan, the capital, whose name was Mordechai, the son of Yair, the son of Shimi, the son of Kish, a man from the tribe of Benjamin. And there's another Ish in the Meggila, and that is when Esther, at the end of the Meggila, turns to Achashverosh and describes this horrible man who's plotting to kill her people. And Achashverosh says, who is this man who wants to do this to you? And Esther points her finger and says, Ish Tsar V'Oyev Haman Hara Hazeh. It's this terrible man, this evil Haman. So we see that Haman is called an Ish and Mordechai is called an Ish. And interestingly enough, both of them were the Ishes that had said they did not want forced drinking at the royal banquet. Each one of them had a very different reason. The reason why Mordechai did not want the men to drink, to be forced to drink at least, was A, because we spoke about last week, there'd be problems with the wine. Even if it was kosher wine, if it had been poured, it could be yayin nesach. There could be all kinds of problems with the wine. Number one, just kashrus-wise. Number two, what happens after you drink a lot of wine? A lot of times, inappropriate things. So Mordechai was petitioning the king that there should be no forced drinking at this party, contrary to normal Persian custom. He did not want the Jews to end up falling into all sort of sordid acts while they were drunk. On the other hand, Haman was actually petitioning the king that there should not be any forced drinking, because Haman's goal in this party was to bring about the downfall of Klal Yisrael. And if they were forced to drink, they could later turn back and say, it's not my fault. I was forced to drink. Of course, I was totally drunk. I had no das. I had no mind, right? A person is required to drink on Purim until they don't know the difference between the cursed is Haman and blessed is Mordechai. According to one opinion, what this means is we're only required to drink until the point where you don't understand the difference between the cursed reasons of Haman for not wanting you to drink and the blessed reasons of Mordechai for wanting you to not drink at this party, which is a very subtle difference and much different than drinking to the point where you don't remember your last name. So, that is one of the opinions on what this was. So again, both Mordechai and Haman are petitioning, no forced drinking. King Achashverosh says, okay, acquiesces, and there is no forced drinking at this party. However, what there was enormous amounts of copious wine, lasos kirtzon ish ve'ish. Each man would get the wine that they wanted most. most people have a proclivity towards the wine that is from their country because it's what they're familiar with and they're used to. The man from Scotland likes to drink Scotch, and the Irishman likes to drink Irish whiskey. The American likes to drink bourbon, and the Japanese likes to drink sake. And King Achashverosh had all of these types of wines and intoxicating beverages there for the many men of his kingdom, la'asos kirtzon ish ve'ish, to serve each man according to their will, the kind of alcohol, the kind of wine they would be most familiar with, whether it be a Rioja for the Spaniard or a Bordeaux for the snotty Frenchman who only drinks Bordeaux. Okay, fine. And of course, us Americans will take it from Napa. Okay, so that was how they sort of set it up. Everybody was able to get the wine they were familiar with and comfortable with, and that was Kirtzon Ish Ve'ish. Now we get to the beginning of the women's lib movement. Okay, now, as we say, Davar Be'ito Matov. A thing in its right time, how good is it? However, a thing in its wrong time has disastrous results, and we're going to see that Vashti's attempted early launch of the Women's Lib Party did not work out so well for her. Okay, Gam Vashti Malka Asasam Ishtei Nashim. Also, Vashti the queen made a feast for the women, Beis HaMalchus, in the royal house, Asher LaMelech Achashverosh, which belonged to the king Achashverosh. Now, there was a very, very big difference of opinion between how Vashti viewed herself and her relationship with her husband, and how Achashverosh viewed himself and his relationship with his wife. This is commonly the case, but here there were higher stakes. Okay, so, for starters, Vashti sees herself as she is the true royal. She is the one who comes from the long line of Babylonian kings from the Babylonian Empire. She's the daughter of Belshazzar, the great-granddaughter of Nebuchadnezzar, one of the greatest conquerors the world has ever seen. She has incredible amounts of royal blood coursing through her veins. She is the true royal in the family. Achashverosh, in her mind, however, is not so much that a royal. Why? Depending on which opinion. According to one opinion, remember we said Achashverosh was a commoner who found a huge treasure and bribed and bought his way up into power, in which case he truly had no royal blood. According to the other opinion, he was the son of Koresh, who was a king who took the kingship by force from his grandfather, who threw him out to the wilderness because of his illegitimacy in being born, and Koresh, the dog, which is what Koresh meant in ancient Persian, was raised by a wild dog. In either case, it's not exactly like Achashverosh has generations and generations of royal blood, like Vashti, who was the real royal in this picture. So she sees herself as the real royal in this marriage. Achashverosh, of course, sees things a little bit differently. Achashverosh sees it. You were a slave girl. You were a girl that was taken captive. We slaughtered your entire family. We had rachmanis on you. We had compassion on you. And what you really are is nothing other than a captive who I, in my greatness and my royalty, happen to have enormous compassion on and brought you into the fold of my house and into my marriage. And therefore, all your luck is because of me. I'm the true royal over here. You're the slave girl that I happen to elevate. As you can imagine, that causes for friction. This is before the times of therapy and before the times of the great work of Martin Seligman. So they had to work it out their own without pits for attention. Now, okay, I already made a bracha. Sorry, I did not mean to deny you a bracha, but I just wanted to put that out there so you shouldn't think I'm drinking without a bracha. Okay? Okay. Now, Achashverosh sees it as it's Vashti Hamalka. In that order. Vashti, this regular slave woman, who I made into Hamalka, I made into the queen. We'll see later how Vashti refers to herself. It's the exact opposite. Hamalka Vashti. I'm the queen, I'm the royal, my name happens to be Vashti. Okay, now, when Achashverosh made his party, now Vashti also, it's amazing, it's people's delusions of grandeur, people's obsession with kavod, and where their status is in the world can often lead them to the weirdest and strangest of self-opinions. So for example, Vashti in her mind was really supposed to be the king. But because in those days, women were not allowed to be kings, so her husband was. Now remember, this is a woman whose entire family was slaughtered and was taken captive, but yet in her mind, she's really supposed to be the king over the entire Persia and Media, the entire Malchus Achashverosh, and the reason why she's not is because she's a woman, and therefore they had to give it to her husband. Okay, so therefore, when there comes time to make a royal party, she says to her husband, I want the exact same royal party for the women. Right? Equal pay for equal work. This is going to be line for line. Whatever the cooks are preparing for the men, they're going to prepare for the women. I had a friend of mine. He actually sold me my very first life insurance policy. He ended up becoming the Rookie of the Year for New York Life, one of the largest life insurance companies. Interestingly enough, the person who sold me my second life insurance policy became Rookie of the Year for Northwestern Mutual, also one of the largest insurance policy companies. I'm not sure why I have so many life insurance policies. My wife keeps getting, why don't we get another one? No, I'm kidding, God forbid. And interestingly enough, I guess it's a skula to sell me a life insurance policy because both people have done that in the past, have become Rookies of the Year for nationally acclaimed companies. Now, when my friend was with New York Life awards those who are the top sellers in their companies with pretty lavish trips. And what's interesting is actually a lot of the top sellers in New York Life are Jewish, many of them Hasidish. And the company has a policy that when they go on these vacations, and then they went on some really, safaris in Africa, beautiful, insanely beautiful. And the policy of the company is that if there's anybody on the trip that keeps kosher, then not only do they serve them kosher, but it's not like, a person goes on a cruise and they had kosher, but it was like basically airline food and they would bring it out to the meal each time, double wrapped and microwaved. It was like, no. They would actually get legitimate mashgichim, and the company policy was that the food had to mimic the food that was the non-kosher food. And obviously, if they were serving shrimp cocktail, there's not much you can mimic. Oh, you can, because they have that fake shrimp. But it's not exactly the same thing from what I hear. I don't know. But in any case, the attempt was that every single meal, if they were serving steak and whatever for the non-kosher food, that was what they were serving for the kosher food. So it's very interesting, very beautiful that the company has that sensitivity to their Jewish employees. So Vashti said the same thing. Whatever you're serving on this side, you're serving on my side. And Achashverosh says, fine, no problem. Now, of course, her intention was to make the people sin through immorality. She, according to one opinion, the women and men sat separately. That's clear from the text. However, according to one of the opinions of the Midrashim, the women were actually seated a little bit elevated above where the men were and in full view, so that when the men were drinking, as men are wont to do, and the women would be in full view to inflame their passions, and hopefully their plan was that great sin would ensue. Great expectations. Okay, fine. That is the first pasuk in terms of this party. Now, Bayom Hashvi'i Ketov Leiv HaMelech Bayayin, on the seventh day, when the heart of the king was good with wine, Amar leMehuman B'Zisach Charvona B'Ksav Avaksa Zeisar V'Karkas. He said to Mehuman, B'Ksav Charvona B'Ksav Avaksa Zeisar and Karkas Shivas Asarisim, the seven chamberlains. Now, interestingly enough, what does the word chamberlain mean? Historically, actually, the chamberlain was the person who would come and bring in and out the chamber pot of the king. I actually read a whole article about this, meaning in those days they didn't have modern bathrooms, and often they would have, if a person needs to use the restroom, they would have a chamber pot brought in, and the kings would have a little bit more royal ones. It would be a nice seat covered with like velvet or some kind of nice cloth, but underneath it would be a pot, and the person who would change that would be known as the chamberlain. However, interestingly enough, it was actually, to a certain degree, it wasn't like the lowest position. You would think it would be the lowest position in the castle, but it actually wasn't, because those people were always around the king. Having such access to the king was something that not everybody had, so being a chamberlain, while being on the lower end of the totem pole, was not exactly the lowest. So because there were people that the king was very familiar with. In any case, Shivas Asarisim HaMesharsim Es Pnei HaMelech Achashverosh, who would serve the king Achashverosh. Now, on the first day of the feast, Mordechai made a decree upon those who were not partaking in the party, especially those who were the remaining members of the Sanhedrin, that they should fast for 6 days. Okay, now if you remember the timeline over here, what is the seventh day? We did this last week. The seventh day, because remember, the 180-day party started Yamim Rabim, very big days, and during the springtime, when the days start getting big. And it lasted through Tishrei. The first party ended on the third day of Elul. The second party starts on the fourth day of Elul, and it goes through basically the last day of the party is Yom Kippur. So Achashverosh, now everyone's going to fast on Yom Kippur anyway, but Achashverosh made a decree upon those in the Sanhedrin and their Anshe Knesset Agdola, whoever was around, that they have to fast for 6 days. So the whole week leading up, the whole week of Aseret Simei Tshuva, they fasted every day. Some people still have the custom to do this today. Some people just on Monday and Thursday. You eat at night, obviously. You don't go a week without eating food. But they decree that they should fast all the entire week, so that the Jews should be saved. There should not be terrible sin. And on the seventh day, which was Shabbos and Yom Kippur, they were answered with an affirmative salachti kidvarecha, so to speak. Hashem says, I will provide you reprieve, and we're going to see what happens right now. Obviously, Vashti and what ends up happening with her. Now, Achashverosh had 7 ministers, one for each day of the week. Now, for the first 6 days of the party, Achashverosh held himself back from overindulging, right? he knew you got to be a good host. So if you got to be a good host, you can't be drunk on the first day and incapacitate yourself for the rest of the party. So for the first 6 days, Achashverosh really held himself back from wine. He drank, sparingly. But finally on the 7th day, he said, look, I just had a 180-day party and a 7-day party. It's finally time for me to let my hair down a little bit. And it was on the 7th day, Ketov Lev HaMelech Bayayin, when finally the king started indulging in his eating and drinking. And of course, we know what happens next. So what does he say to his chamberlains? They should bring Vashti the queen. Remember, Vashti the queen. She's just Vashti. She's a regular girl, a slave girl that I brought up and made into the queen before the king, Bekesser Malchus, in her royal crown, to show the nations and the ministers her beauty, for she was very fair to look upon. Now, Providence directed that the downfall of Vashti should take place on Shabbos. Why? Because Vashti was very cruel, and she would specifically conscript Jewish girls who she would first force to work for her on Shabbos, unclothed, for ultimate humiliation, and her attempt was she wanted to break the spirit of the Jewish women. Vashti, very wisely, knew that it was always the women who were the backbone of the Jewish people. When we were in Mitzrayim, what does the Gemara say? B'schar nashim tzidkanios nigula avasenu mi Mitzrayim. It was in the merit of the righteous women who did not give up. The men were ready to give up. All our children are being thrown into the water. We're all slaves. We're done here. But the Gemara tells us the entire story about how the women held on to their faith. They said, Hashem will give us a Yeshua. And they encouraged their husbands to keep going and forging forward and building the Jewish people. B'schar nashim tzidkanios, we got out of Mitzrayim. When it comes time to serve the Egel, what does Aaron say? Aaron says, go get your wives' earrings. Because he knows that the wives will never give. Not that they won't give their jewelry. When it comes time to give the Mishkan, which is this week's parsha, we read about the kiyar. The kiyar was made from the copper that was from the backs of the mirrors that the women's used. That's something very important to a woman, how she appears and how she looks. But they were willing to give the copper off the back of their mirrors to build the Mishkan. But he knew that the Nashim Tzidkanios of Klal Yisrael would not give anything to the Egel. That's why Aaron said, go get your wives' jewelry. Of course, what did the people do? They gave their own jewelry. The women did not partake in the Egel. When it came time, the spies go to Eretz Yisrael, and they come back and give a terrible report about Eretz Yisrael. The men cried all night. The women did not cry all night. So the women are always consistently, again and again, the backbone of the Jewish people. And Vashti's attempt with taking these Jewish girls, bringing them into her palace and forcing them to work on Shabbos in the most degrading of fashions, was to break the spirit of the Jewish women. Just like the Cantonist decree in Russia was there to break the Jewish spirit by stealing their pride and their joy, their little children, and forcing them into forced labor for 25 years in the Russian military, which, by the way, it almost worked. I mean, if you look at what it did, the devastation it wreaked upon the Jewish community, the Cantonist decree might have been the most horrific decree that we saw in 1,000 years of Gullus, obviously up until the Holocaust. But it literally decimated the spirit of the Russian community because it broke them. When you take the most precious and vulnerable thing and just strip them away of everything they have of their humanity and force them into the Russian army, so too Vashti's attempt was to take the backbone of the Jewish people, the Jewish women, and break them. And she knew if she could only break the Jewish women, the rest of the people would fall. However, that was not what happened. They didn't break, despite the incredible degradation that she forced upon them. It was therefore decreed upon her that not only would she die in degradation, but she would die in degradation on Shabbos, the day she tormented the Jewish people. She also knew that Shabbos is a great protection for the Jewish people and a hastener of the redemption, and that's why she tried to get them to forget about Shabbos. Now, in Persia, if you remember before, we talked about this briefly, there's Babylonia and Persia, Bavel and Paras. There are two of the Galios of the Jewish people, right? We have four Galios. There's four great sort of arch exiles. We have Yavan, which is Greece, and Paras, Persia. We have Bavel, which is Babylonia, and we have Rome, Edom, which we are currently still in right now. The Gemara talks about the difference between Bavel and Paras. And the Gemara says that the Babylonians were, by comparison, very refined compared to the Persians. The Persians, the Gemara, the Talmud describes, it compares them to a bear. It says the Persian people were like bears. They were swarthy like bears, they ate like bears, they drank like bears, they were like an incredible, like a very uncouth people. And the Babylonians were much more cultured. Now the Persians did have a custom that at their parties, their own women would come out and dance in a provocative manner in front of them, but the Babylonians did not have that. Now remember, Vashti comes from a Babylonian family, but of course the king would never normally, under normal circumstances, maybe you'd have that at a Persian party, a house party, a guy with a bunch of his friends or something like that, so it's wrong, it's degrading, but a king would never have his wife come out like that. And for sure, from Vashti's perspective, she's a Babylonian. She comes from a much more cultured heritage. She would never do that. But what happens? Achashverosh is drunk. The men are sitting around talking about the beauty of women. And each person is saying, the women from my country are the most beautiful. No, the women from my country are the most beautiful. No, I'm from India, the Indian women. No, I'm from Nigeria, the Nigerian women. I'm from Egypt, the Egyptian women. I'm from, Syria. And finally, Achashverosh, in his drunkenness, comes in and says, no, my wife's not any of your nationalities, and she's more beautiful than all of them. And they, of course, say to the king, of course she's more beautiful, because you dress her up in the finest of threads, in the finest of couture. Anybody who's being tended upon and doted upon by all the most skilled artisans and tailors and fashion, fashion consultants in the country is going to look beautiful. To which Achashverosh says, oh yeah, I will bring her out without any of that advantage, and you will see that she's more beautiful than all of them. Now, another reason why Achashverosh wanted his wife to come out without clothing was that he had not yet got the Jews to totally succumb to sin. And he was desperate. Now what he did not also realize well is that it was Yom Kippur, and even then Yom Kippur was, the sacred day, and the Jews mostly were not at the party anymore. The vast majority of the Jews had left to go to Shul on Yom Kippur. But Achashverosh is still thinking, he doesn't know exactly the total head count at his party. He's like, this is the final day. We got to get this mass sinning. I've been hoping for this to happen. It hasn't happened yet. If I bring out my wife in such a provocative way, then all the other men will say, hey, to their wives, why don't you become more provocative? Look at the queen. She's being provocative. And then massive sin will happen. Now, his goal, of course, was that it would stop. They knew that the God of the Jewish people, we talked about this, I think, last week, the God of the Jewish people is known for hating znus. And therefore, if he could only get the Jewish people to sin in that way, in the area of immorality, then he would be able to stop this future temple, stop the Jewish God from coming after him. Of course, ironically, as a result, from him trying to do this, he ends up losing his wife and taking on a wife who happens to be Jewish, whose son rebuilds the temple. Okay. Now, it also caused Achashverosh to lose a lot of respect in the kingdom. Because you're telling your wife to do such a degrading act, like that's not cool. Like no one sees that as cool. Like if you're the king, it's like, ugh, that's the way you're acting. It's degrading. Shame on you. So he actually lost a lot of respect. It's like when you see somebody. One of the things they tell salespeople is when you're a salesperson, don't beat up on the competition's product. It's the most basic attempt from a person to do. That's the standard. That's what everyone wants to do. It's the easy way out. How do I promote my product? By bashing everybody else's product. But good salespeople will be told, do not do that, because in your eyes you cheapen yourself when you do that. So here Achashverosh is asking his wife to do such a degrading thing. He cheapened himself in the eyes of his own people. Furthermore, and they thought he was an idiot. Vashti, of course, was enraged, okay? And on top of the fact that she's being summoned to do such a degrading thing, she's being summoned to do it by the chamberlains. The least you could do is send somebody important, right? You're sending your chamberlains to come and tell me this? Now, God also caused this to happen when Achashverosh was drunk, because then if he ended up on impulse deciding to kill his wife, he would act quickly and then it would be too late to come back. But Tama'ain Hamalka Vashti, and the queen Vashti refused Lavo B'dvar HaMelech to come to the words of the king. Remember here, but Tima'ain Hamalka Vashti. She's not Vashti Hamalka in her eyes. She's Hamalka. She's the queen. She's the royal over here. She comes from royal bloodline. Her name happens to be Vashti. Hello, my name is Queen V. That's how her name tag says, right? I am the queen. Very clear about this, right? So she refuses to come with Melech Asher Biyad Asarisim at the hand of the chamberlains. That's what you send me. By Yiksov HaMelech Ma'od, and the king gets very angry. V'chamaso Ba'arabo, and his anger starts to burn within him. Now, Vashti was furious with her husband's order, right? She's like, I am a Babylonian. We are cultured and sophisticated, and we would never do such a degrading thing like you sick Persian people. In my country, even a laundry woman wouldn't do this. Right? Now, interestingly enough, the Mamlois brings down that Vashti did not have confidence in her looks. She said, what if the people in the court do not find her beautiful? Right? What if they laughed at her? Now Achashverosh understood that Vashti might be concerned about that, and Achashverosh said to her, come out bekeser malchus, with the royal crown. Nobody will ever laugh at somebody wearing the royal crown. So if you're concerned that people are not going to find your looks attractive and they're going to laugh at you, don't worry, you're going to come out with the royal crown, and this way no one ever dare laugh at you. Furthermore, she was afraid. She knew that Achashverosh was a very base man, and therefore Achashverosh only really liked her or loved her because of her looks, and she was concerned, if I lose the esteem of my looks, which right now Achashverosh is so proud of me, he thinks I'm the most beautiful person around, but if I come out and people are like, then Achashverosh is going to lose his respect for my looks, and then I've got nothing. I've got nothing to go on. He doesn't love me for me. Now, here is a lesson in diplomacy. Okay, now there's a massive back and forth. The conversation between Vashti and Achashverosh is amazing. It goes back and forth, back and forth. And the Meggila just says one pasuk, Vatamein hamalkah Vashti. Now part of the reason, as you're going to see in a moment, is that the Meggila was written while Achashverosh was still alive, and some of the things that we're going to see that Vashti said to her husband would not exactly be printable while the king was still alive. So here is the first message she sent to go back to Achashverosh, and it is a stark and clear lesson in diplomacy. She said as follows, go tell your stupid master that in the house of my father, Belshazzar, he would not have even been good enough to clean the stables. Okay, don't you realize that I am Vashti, daughter of Belshazzar, the kings of Babylon? If you would have seen my father, he could have drank the amount of 1,000 men and held his alcohol. But your fool of a master drinks a little, and this is what he comes up with? If wine makes him so crazy, tell him to stop drinking. Which, of course, is never the really right thing to tell somebody who's getting drunk. Like, they all think they've got it under control. And for sure, tell your stupid master that he would not have even been able to be a stable boy in my father's kingdom. It's also probably not a good thing to tell a king who is very powerful and very drunk. Achashverosh hears it, and he starts to sober up a little. And he sends this message. You know, it's like one of these times, like, do you really want to go there? We can, if you'd like to, but do you want to do this? Like, I don't think you want to. So here's what he says. He says, beware of what you're doing. Be very, very careful. You're treading on very thin ice over here. Obey my orders and present yourself before my company, and if you disobey, you will be killed, and your beauty will cease to exist. The queen comes back with another great line. Go back to your stupid king and tell him that his ideas are useless and his orders are outrageous. I am the daughter of the great king Belshazzar and the granddaughter of the famed Nebuchadnezzar. It's amazing. She really, if you notice in her language, again and again and again, she just totally sees herself as something totally different than Achashverosh sees her. Other than the king himself, Achashverosh, no one has ever seen my royal body. Now here, she actually comes up with some very good thoughts. She says, doesn't the fool realize that he's only harming himself? If the noblemen in the court see my beauty and really desire me, how long is it before one of them will assassinate the king to get at me? And if they don't find me beautiful, then he'll have made a fool of himself in front of the entire kingdom. It's a lose-lose situation, which actually is it's a well-thought-out response. Even a simple laundryman doesn't force his wife to appear unclothed in public. If he wants me to appear now, but she starts to crack. If he wants me to appear in public, I want to cover my body with a veil. Achashverosh says, no, I'm not going to hear of it. Then Vashti comes up with another thing. She says, all right, I'll do it. However, please don't make me wear the crown. Because that just makes it that much more humiliating. The crown represents royalty. The crown represents regal, a regal bearing. And you're asking me to do something very degrading. Now, it's one thing alone if someone's walking around in a degraded fashion, but to have the crown, it just makes the view, the visual, so much more absurd, so much more humiliating. Now, it's a very fascinating idea in terms of just the Jewish concept of tznius. We human beings, all are made with Tzelem Elokim. We are made in the image of God. God, of course, is the Melech Malchei Amlochim HaKadosh Baruch Hu. God is the King of all kings. Which means that inside of every one of us is a piece of God. Now, of course, when we talk about being made B'Tselem Elokim, in the image of God, God doesn't have an image. So what does it mean, right? God's not male, he's not female, he doesn't have long hair, he doesn't have short hair, he doesn't have hair, there's no he, right? So what does that mean when we say that we are created b'tselem Elokim? So there's many different responses on this, but one of the main responses is that we were created with chachma, the ability to have wisdom. God is wiser than anything, and he created us human beings with great wisdom, which is why human beings and human beings alone are the only species on this entire planet that has ever built a house. Well, animals build nests, by the way, and some of them are brilliant, but that's just instinctively they're able to build one house. Okay, so let's take away a house. Library. We're the only people and the only species in the entire world ever to have built a library. For that matter, ever to have written a book. For that matter, ever to have made ourselves a panini. Right? Think about it. Like the lion is the king of the beast. And yet he's never sitting there over a fresh kill on the savannah on a bright morning in Africa somewhere and saying, I'm pulling out a strip of zebra here. Why don't I put like a club sandwich on top, club sandwich with mustard, mayonnaise, eggs, some celery, some onions, we can make it crunchy, add a little sriracha, like there's just no thought like that. We have enormous chachma, which of course we got because we were created b'tselem Elokim. Now, where do I see the godliness on somebody? So we know, Chochmas Adam Ta'ir Panav. The wisdom of a person shines through on their face. Which, by the way, is the reason why in Judaism we don't cover our faces, unlike the burqa women in Israel. That's an abomination of Judaism. Now, godly wisdom shines forth on our face. And the idea of tznius is that if we were to dress in a way, or appear, it's not only dress, it's whatever we do that is not within the lines of modesty, whether it's screaming across the street or whatever it is that we do, it creates such a humiliation because it's juxtaposed against the crown of God. The crown of God is right here. But if a person dresses in a way or acts in a way that draws people away from that or creates a contrast between their face and their body, it's just that much more embarrassing. The queen here is saying, I'll come out in this degrading way, but don't make me wear the crown. That's embarrassing. When royalty is juxtaposed with degradation. When royalty is juxtaposed with trashiness. That's why, of course, clothing is called levush, which means lo bosh. To not be embarrassed. It would be incredibly humiliating for me as a human being if my royal crown, the Chachma of Hashem, which is imbued upon me, is juxtaposed against something less than regal. And therefore, I want to wear levushim. I want to wear clothing, so there should be lo bosh. There should not be this humiliation created by the juxtaposition of royalty and trash. Okay. Finally, but Achashverosh will not hear of it. You're coming out with the crown. Finally, Vashti agrees. She says, fine. And then she looks in the mirror and she can't believe what she saw. Her entire body is breaking out with a hideous rash and lesions and discolorations. And she had a massive polyp that appeared as a tail. And as a child, you're always taught Vashti grew a tail. It was very gratifying to see. The Mam Lois describes it as Vashti had a massive polyp on her back that appeared like a tail. So it's much more, kind of works out a little better. This was divine punishment for her vanity and for the way she made Jewish girls work for her in a degrading fashion. Okay, so now she's in trouble. She was ready to do it, but she can't. It's horrific. So she sends back the next message to the king. She says, look, the reason why you want me to come out is to make the Jews sin. It's Yom Kippur, and they're not here. I will do it, but now is just not the right time. It's not going to work. She's hoping she'll have time to heal, and her body will heal up. So she says, I will do it, but not now. The king says, no, you're coming out right now. And finally, she comes on the last line of defense. She says like this, I don't believe the king really gave that message. The king would never, no king would ever order his wife to come out in such a degrading fashion. The king probably said, tell the queen to come out and make sure she looks really beautiful. And the chamberlains, with their dirty minds, no pun intended, look at their job, right? Okay. The chamberlains were the ones who switched up the message from the king and made it that the king said I should come out in this degrading fashion. I don't believe that was really the king's order. The only way I'll believe that is if it comes from the king's mouth himself. Of course, if Achashverosh would come and tell her, he would see the situation and let it rest. That's why It says, "V'tama'ena Malka Vashti," the queen Vashti refused to come. B'dvar HaMelech Asher B'yad Sarisim. That was in the hands of the chamberlains. I don't know. It's the chamberlain. I don't believe them. I don't believe the chamberlains when they tell me that really the king is saying you should come in such a degrading fashion. I want to hear it from his mouth. Now, back in the men's side of the mechitza, so to speak, Achashverosh is burning mad. He's trying to calm himself down. He's like, at that moment when someone's like totally drunk and they know they just messed up really, really bad, and they're like trying to backpedal really quickly. It's like the yeshiva bacher who comes to your, his Rebbe's house on Purim, and he's like so drunk, and he's like, Rabbi, I love you, and like someone's like, dude, you're talking to the cupboard. And he's like, he backpedals like, oh, that's kind of embarrassing. And he's like, no, I even love the cupboard of Rabbi. It's like trying to save yourself, and it's like, it's too late. You're too far gone, buddy. I'm sorry. That train has left the station. So Achashverosh is at the point right now where like he knows he messed up. Like he realizes this was really bad, but his wife has humiliated him in front of everybody, calling him a stupid king, saying that he's not worthy to even be a stable boy in her father's kingdom. He doesn't know what to do and he's burning up. So he says, let me call for counsel. Now it's finally the time to call for counsel. And the king called for those who are wise, those who know the times. For so is the words of the king, before all those who know law and judgment. Who did the Achashverosh call? He called the Jewish sages. The Jewish sages were known throughout the entire time the Jews were in Galus, and even today. The Jews are always used as people who are like for Baal Eitzah, people who are going to give advice. The Babylonian kings who had subjugated the Jews and destroyed the temple and brought us into exile, they had Jewish advisors. Achashverosh had Jewish advisors. During the time, the Barbanel was the treasurer to the Spanish king until 1492, when the Jews were all sent out, and the king pleaded with him to stay, and he said, no, I'm leaving with my people. Today, I mean, if you look at the entire financials, Ben Bernanke, Alan Greenspan, Janet Yellen, I mean, Jew, right? I mean, Jews throughout Galus have always been known to be very, very wise advisors. So, the king says, bring in the Jewish advisors. They're Yodei Ha'itim. Yodei Ha'itim either means two things. Either it means Yodei Ha'itim, they knew the times, which means that any time they knew what to answer. Like Rabbi Irons. Rabbi Irons, you ask him a question about anything, any topic, any time, and boom, he just starts pulling Sfarim off the shelf. There's no delay. There's no delay between question and answer. The man knows so much. You can ask him any question, any topic, and he's got the answer. He's Yodei Ha'itim. He knows it, and right on time. That's one explanation. The other explanation is Yodei Ha'itim. They knew how to calculate the times. The Jewish calendar, if you haven't noticed, is incredibly complex. We got leap years, 9 out of every 17 years, and 29-day months, and 30-day months, and it can't fall out on Shabbos, and Shabbos can't fall on Yom Kippur. I mean, it can't fall on Yom Kippur, but it can, although I do Rosh. And it's amazing. All these holidays cannot fall out on these days or these days. It is incredibly complicated to make the Jewish calendar. As a matter of fact, in the Talmud, there's a story where one time, one of the Amoraim wanted to show, one of the other Amoraim, I'm no lightweight. He says, oh yeah, I just calculated the Jewish calendar for 20 years forward. That was that was the pinnacle. If you could do that, you clearly were not a lightweight. So these were the Yodei Ha'itim. These were the greatest sages, the ones who had set the calendar, who had this great wisdom. And he says, come on in here and tell me what to do with my wife. Of course, the Jewish sages were in real trouble when they got this question. On the one hand, so first of all, now, Achashverosh does not try this case himself, right? Normally, a capital case like this, someone's mocking the king, it's not a very long decision. The king says off with his head and it's over. But he said, I can't try this myself. Number one, I'm an interested party, right? This is affecting me, so I would appear biased. Number two, I'm in a rage. And number three, I'm drunk. So therefore, for all these reasons, he wanted it to pass on the judgment to someone else. Now, the Jews were in quite a quandary. It's a lose-lose situation. If you tell the king, listen, man, I don't know how to break this to you, but you're kind of drunk, and you asked something highly inappropriate of your wife, so why don't we just let her have a pass right now? Then the king could say, what? She humiliated me in public, and you're telling me to just forgive her? You don't care about my honor. Off with your heads. Okay, that's on one hand. On the other hand, they didn't like Vashti, right? Vashti was not nice to the Jews in terms of her Shabbos servants, right? But they also realized, let's say they tell the king to kill Vashti. You want me to kill my own wife? What's wrong with you? Off with your heads, right? Or furthermore, what happens the next day he wakes up without his queen? Then he's like, wait, what happened? Like, oh yeah, the Jews told you to kill your wife last night. What? go after the Jews. Or, furthermore, let's say they recommend that Vashti be killed, and somehow Vashti survives this. Wow, are the Jews going to have a mortal enemy forever and ever and ever? So the Jews do what's called in diplomatic circles the punt. They say to the king, we are not the right guy for this question. And they explained, they said, when we were in our country, in Eretz Yisrael, where we had Yishuv Adas, we had the ability to think clearly, we had the Urim V'Tumim from last week's Parsha, the amazing, miraculous Choshen that could answer up questions that were asked of it by lighting up the various answers. Then we were able to try cases, we were able to think things through clearly, but now we have been exiled from our land, we have suffered many difficulties, we've been shooken up, and we don't have our Urim V'Tumim, and therefore we have made it our commitment that we will not try any capital cases until we go back to the land of Israel. We don't have the right frame of mind. We're like a barrel of wine that's been shook up, and all the impurities are now, that have been settled on the bottom, are all moving about throughout the whole thing. It's cloudy, it's unclear. That's our mind. We can't answer this. I'll give you a recommendation, though. I've got someone else's business card. Here we go. Why don't you go to the elders of Ammon and Moab? They've been living in their land for a long time. They're very wise. They're like a wine that's been sitting stable for the same place, and all the impurities have settled to the bottom, and their wisdom is very clear. One of the reasons that they told him specifically to go to Ammon and Moab is, if you remember how Ammon and Moab came about as a nation, they came about through Lot, who in a drunken state lived with his daughters, and therefore they said, this is a nation that has a very good experience with drunkenness and its outcomes. Why don't you ask them? They're the experts on this topic. Okay. Next. V'karov elav karshana she'sar ad masa tarshish meres marsana mimuchan shivas saray parasim udai ro'et pnei hamelech hayoshvim rishona b'malchus, and the nearest to him were karshana ad masa tarshish meres I skip one. Karshana she'sar ad masa tarshish meres marsana mimuchan, the 7 ministers of Paras Umadai, those who see the king's face, that sit first in the kingdom. After the Jewish sages disqualified themselves, committed the punt, the king turned to the 7 princes of Persia and Media who were closest to him. These men represented various parts of his kingdom. Karshana was from Africa, and he was in charge of the royal stables and livestock. Shesar was from India, and he was in charge of the royal wine cellars. Admasa was from Western Europe. He was in charge of the royal fields and gardens. Admasa, Adama, Shesar, Shechar, drinking. Tarshish was from Egypt, and he was in charge of the royal household, the day-to-day going-ons in the palace. There are a bunch of different opinions about who Meres, Marsana, and most importantly, Memuchan were, because he's the guy who's going to play the greatest role. Some say they were from Jerusalem, and because they had seen so much, they were the wisest of the 7, and they were in charge of picking the other king's appointments. Some say they were Jews, some say they were Gentiles. There is an opinion that they actually were from Ammon and Moab, and that the king was somewhat listening to the advice of the Jewish people who said, go to Ammon and Moab. And there are 2 other primary opinions. One of them, of course, that we all are familiar with, is that Memuchan was Haman. The word Memuchan comes from the word Muchan, which means prepared. And Haman was always prepared to do the Jews a disservice. He was always prepared for Peranios. He was Muchan lePeranios. He was always prepared for Peranios, and we're going to see what he recommends. There is a fascinating Tosfos in Gemara Meggila that says that Memuchan was, drum roll, you're not going to believe this, Daniel. Daniel. And it says that the Persian king forced Daniel to marry a Persian woman. I don't know exactly meaning in terms of, obviously it's Yahar Val Yavar, so it could be there was no consummation of the marriage. But he was forced to live in the same household, under the same sort of title as a Persian woman, but she was a very wealthy, aristocratic woman, and she lorded it over him and made him speak her language, Farsi, and it's actually fascinating because you're going to see later the recommendation is that all the women have to speak the language of their husband. So according to one opinion, it was actually Daniel, and he was now going to try to rectify the situation that he was facing at home as well. Now, why was he called Memuchan? Because he was Muchan lePerania, for Nisim. There was a time when the king had made a decree that no one could pray for 30 days, and Daniel defied that decree and prayed, and because of that, because he was Moser Nefesh, he was later given a sentence by the king of being thrown into a den of lions, and Hashem made a miracle. You were ready to be Moser Nefesh for me. I will make a miracle, and the lions did not hurt him at all, and he walked out unharmed. Now, according to the opinion that Memuchan is Daniel, despite the fact that all the other Jewish sages punted, Daniel did not. Because he said, I do everything l'shem shamayim. And therefore, I'm ready, I'm not afraid of the ramifications. The rest of the Chachamim were afraid of the ramifications. He said, look, if I was afraid of the ramifications, I wouldn't have ended up in a lion's den. But I do what I do for God and for the Ribono Shalom, and therefore, I will take the answer and go ahead with it. That's according to the opinion that Memuchan was Daniel. However, we're going to go with the opinion right now that Memuchan was Haman. Okay. Now, Kedas Mala Sos B'Malka Vashti. What should we do with the Queen Vashti? He says to them, according to the law, what should be done to the Queen Vashti inasmuch as she did not comply with the order of the king brought by the hand of the chamberlains? Now, Achashverosh is very interesting. Achashverosh here has to put this in front of other people, because that's sort of, he doesn't want to appear biased and all. But at this point, he's backtracking. He clearly wants her to live. And if you notice, suddenly now he says, what should we do with Hamalka Vashti? This time Achashverosh calls her Queen Vashti. Right? She's queen first, Vashti second. He's telling the people that are going to judge this case, listen guys, she's a queen. Yes, or anybody else who disrespects the king, it's immediate death. But she's a queen, she's a royal. That's first of all. So suddenly he's kind of upping her stature in the eyes of the people. So maybe she deserves clemency for that. Next, he says, she didn't listen, Asher lo asasas ma'amar melech Achashverosh biyad asarisim. He's actually using her line of defense. Her line of defense is, I only heard it from the chamberlains, I never heard it from the king himself. I can't believe the king would actually make this claim. So now, when Achashverosh is sort of presenting the case to his wise men, he says, she didn't listen to the words of the king, Asher biyad asarisim, because it came to the chamberlains. She probably would have, if I had asked her myself, she would have listened to the king. But she heard it from the chamberlains, right? He's putting forth her same argument that she argued. Remember that, right? It's amazing. Furthermore, before it was Dvar HaMelech. In Hebrew, we can parse semantics for a while after we're done over here, but Dvar is always stronger than an Amirah, right? Kosom Rulu Beis Yaakov, right? Lashon Raka. The Gemara, there's a long discussion about that. Before it was Dvar HaMelech, the word of the king. Now it's Ma'amar HaMelech, what the king was saying. It's a lighter language, so he's trying to soften the blow. Okay, now, okay, I'm not even going to read the Hebrew, because I'm not going to read the English either, because you guys know what happens. He says, she's not only going up against you, she's going up against the whole kingdom, against all the women. If the word gets out, they're all going to rise up, and all the princes of Persia and Media, or the king, will look at you differently, and there will be much contempt and wrath. Okay, Haman can see that the king wants clemency for his wife. But Haman is desperate to get her out of the picture. Because Haman had astrologers. Remember, everyone has astrologers, and these astrologers are fairly accurate. They're accurate on the overall picture, like, for example, telling Achashverosh that a Jew will succeed you on the throne. And here, they also were accurate by Haman. They told Haman, his astrologers told him, the king's wife will point you out, and you'll be slated to death for that. Which, of course, would happen. But with the next queen. But right now, Haman is really concerned because he doesn't like Vashti. Vashti doesn't like him. Vashti had snubbed him already. Vashti didn't invite his wife to the party. She invited everybody in Shushan to the party. Vashti did not invite Haman's wife to the party. So there we go. Then you know what happens. You don't invite somebody to the bar mitzvah. Whoa, right? World War VII. Okay? So Vashti was not, Haman is not exactly cozy with Vashti, and much more importantly, he knows that it's the king's wife who's going to finger him out and say this is the one, and he's going to get killed. So he wants Vashti out of the picture. Who does he want in her stead? He has a daughter. He wants his daughter to be there. That's the one way he can sit comfortably. My daughter's not going to finger me out to the king and say, kill this man. So he wants to get Vashti out. Now he sees that the king is losing his resolve. The king doesn't want to kill his wife. So therefore he feels, I need to speak up first. Even though I'm the lowliest of the 7 ministers, he says, I got to speak up first because I eat the king's bread, I love him so much, and therefore I need to speak up because I love you and I care about you. He says like this, there's no way that you can pardon her because she didn't only disrespect you, she disrespected the entire kingdom. She said that you would not be fitting to be a stable boy in her father's kingdom. If you're not fitting to be a stable boy, and we, the rest of the kingdom, have made you our king, then we're all fools. She just offended not only you, but anybody who supports you. Huh? There you go. Haman's good too. We now call Alan Dershowitz. No, okay, fine. So he's got quite the legal arguments here too. Furthermore, he says, when women hear, this is actually what he said, when women hear that she got away with having her own way with her husband, they're going to start this whole women's liberation movement. And women are going to stop listening to their husbands. And therefore, it's going to be a disaster. You're going to bring total social upheaval and chaos to your entire kingdom. He says, I'm aware of Vashti's true nature, and if you allow her to live, she will begin this whole movement, which, by the way, was probably true, meaning because that is the way Vashti felt. Vashti did feel like, hey, I should be the queen, and women should be treated with equal respect, which is ironically right. It's one of the things that Vashti got right. But again, davar b'ito matov, it was not yet time for the women's lib movement to come around. So she said she's a proud and stubborn woman. She will never subjugate herself to you. If you let her live, you will never be respected in your own kingdom. You just spent all this money. You've made this amazing party. You spent all this money to gain respect of the people, to show everybody your osher and your kavod and your wealth. And now the word's going to get out that your own wife desecrated you by the party and you just stood there and took it. You're not going to have any respect. You'll never be... If people are going to say, if you can't control your own wife, how can you control a kingdom? You are going to lose your kingdom. So basically, Haman is building it up to make... It's not just a decision, do I kill my wife who I ordered to come out in a degrading fashion when I was drunk? It's more like, do I want to hold on to my kingdom or not? That's how... And he's very persuasive, right? Haman was good arguments, right? 2 points to the prosecution, right? Okay. He says, you need to take action right away. You need to kill your wife immediately. Listen to this great line. He says, if you kill your first wife for disobedience, your second wife will be very, very obedient. And furthermore, he says, your second time around, you don't want one of these royal women. See, all these royal women, they're so high-strung, they're so stuck up, they're so high maintenance. You want a woman from a common family, but with nice midos, you know? Of course, thinking of his daughter, right? It's amazing. He's doing this whole, Haman's working it from every angle over here, right? Okay. And furthermore, he actually adds a new law, which is going to come up later in the Meggila. He's afraid that Vashti is going to come running into the palace throne room to plead for her life. So right here is where he says, let's make a new rule in this kingdom, that anybody who comes into the throne room without having been invited, should be killed. Which of course will come up later in the Meggila. This is where that decree originated, because he doesn't want Vashti coming into the room and pleading on behalf of her life. And of course, the whole thing is hoping that Vashti will die. He'll get his daughter in. It was good in the eyes of the king and the princes. They did like the words of Memuchan. Vashti was burned alive. Now, Vashti did not... Yes, I know. Sometimes I hear that in Hebrew schools around, they now teach that she was sent away. Sorry, that's the Disney version. The real version is she was burned alive. Now, Ahasuerus did not really want to kill her. Remember, he was drunk. He knew it. And right now, he starts harboring, very interesting, he starts harboring a little bit of a hatred towards Haman at this point. From here on in, Ahasuerus would have conflicting feelings, to say the least, about Haman. And interestingly, if you look in the Meggila, in this word, Vayas HaMelech Kedvar Memuchan, the word Memuchan is spelled differently. Normally it's spelled Mem, Mem, Vav, Chaf, Nun. Here it's spelled Mem, Vav, Mem, Chaf, Nun, which actually spells Mumkan. There's a wound over here. This is where Haman is now wounded in the eyes of the king, and this is sort of the beginning of his downfall. Okay, we have just one more pasuk. Okay, and the king sent letters to all the provinces, to every province according to its script. They sent the letter to every nationality according to its language. Lios kol ish Rabbi, so that every man should dominate in his house, umedaber kilshon amo, and speak like the language of his people. Now, this was now the decree. So Haman, who by the way had a wife who was very, very powerful and did lord over him, and forced Haman too to speak the language of him. So Haman is also seeing this as an opportunity to get back at his wife. He makes the rule of the land that every household should speak the language of the man, even if the woman comes from a much more chashuv family. Okay? And they send this decree out to the whole empire. Interestingly, this was a very important point. Because not only did they send out a decree that the man should lord over his house, they also, in this decree was that anybody whose wife disobeys him should come and report it to the police, and will take care of his wife like we took care of Vashti. And the problem is, most husbands love their wives, and despite the fact that they get into a fight with their wife sometimes, and their wife doesn't do exactly like they say, they don't want her killed. So here, the people start already right now, sort of disrespecting and not listening to the king's decree. The Gemara says, if not for the first decree that came out, by the time the second decree would have come out, the Persians would have ripped the Jews apart immediately. They would not have waited until Yud Gimel Adar. When the second decree came out and said, kill all the Jews, the second Haman-authored decree, Haman-sponsored bill, if this first decree had not come out, the Persians would be like, oh, we have carte blanche to kill the Jews. They would have killed the Jews immediately, instead of waiting for the 13th of Adar. But because this first decree came out, which also was very weird to them, because in that country, and in those times, every man generally did rule over his house. So when you're saying, hey guys, new proclamation, the man rules the house, it's like, oh, you clearly are not ruling your house until now, right? So it made them disrespect Haman, and the fact that he made this crazy decree, like if your wife's not listening to you, you should have her killed. The people, they would just start these. They started suspecting the veracity and the intention of any Haman-sponsored bill, so that by the time the second Haman-sponsored bill would come out, which was kill all the Jews on the 13th of Adar, the people, instead of killing the Jews immediately, were like, let's wait and see. Because the last decree was crazy. Let's wait and see before taking action on this one. And that, of course, will be covered next week later. Thank you so much for coming. Have a wonderful week.